Okay, so let's talk about power. I love this photograph because this has a very tangential connection to me. This is a guy named Oliver Parker Fritzl who's originally from, I think, Boulder or Denver, I can't, one of those two cities. Decided in this was 1908, to drive an electric car across the United States to New York City. He started in Lincoln, Nebraska. Now, I'm from Omaha, right? And so you drive from Lincoln, Nebraska. He drove basically up an old rail line. And this photograph was taken by someone, I don't know who, and the caption on the internet is, "Lost somewhere west of Omaha." So this photograph was taken probably within 20 miles of where I live. Okay? He drove in less than 30 days' time from Lincoln, Nebraska to New York City, many times averaging 100 miles per charge. 100 miles per charge. This is the sticker on a Nissan Leaf. And if you know how to read these stickers, you'll notice that the range, as it shows over here at the end, on a charge is figured at what? 99 miles. Wow, let's see, that was 1908 to 2012. So have we made progress? Well, of course we've made progress. You know, would you like to drive that Fritzl thing, you know, today? Well, yeah, if you had it as a hobby car, but you wouldn't want to drive on an everyday basis. You want your air conditioning, you want your GPS, you want your comfortable seating, you know, you want to be able to travel at 70, 80 miles an hour. His car would do about 20. Most of the time going across those rough roads, it was as low as 5 and 7 miles an hour. So, okay, so when you say, well, there's not enough range in an electric car, well, that all depends on how far you have to drive. Here is a chart that was done by a group of researchers, post-grad students at Columbia University recently, that shows the average distance that most people use in their commute. You'll see that 26% of the people travel, in this case, less than 5 miles in a day. You move over 10 miles in a day, now you've got 24%. You know, and so you start gradually moving over here. Virtually everyone drives less than 40 miles in a day. Well within the range of any of these cars that are parked out here, easily. Here's another way to look at it. Go across to the number of miles driven one way, the cumulative number of commuters, and you take it on up and you see that most everyone, you get out to 60 miles, is almost 100% of the population. Well within the range of any of these cars that are parked out there. So is that really an issue? Okay, so let's take a look at emissions. These are essentially the same car, well, very similar cars. You have a Nissan Leaf and a Nissan Versa. Almost identical platforms. One's electric, one's gasoline. So let's take a look at the emissions on these cars. You've got both cars drive 100 miles. We'll start off with the gasoline Versa. Average is the fuel economies here. I did the math just for the sake of time. In that 100 miles, we'll generate 62.7 pounds of CO2. Okay? Between 60 and 70 pounds of CO2 to drive 100 miles. We'll take the Leaf. Doing the same math, it's a little bit more complicated because we've got to take a look. When people talk about, there's this recent study that came out of the University of Tennessee at Knoxville. We're talking, you probably saw the headlines where it says, so I went and talked to the guy that was the author of that report. And I asked him, well, you know, what planet is an electric car dirtier than a gasoline car? Well, it happens to be certain districts in China where when you look at how their power is generated, those things, it does come out to be, under certain circumstances, more part PM 2.5, okay, particles. CO2 is still lower, but when you look at the particle emissions of it, it is higher, okay? So what you have to bear, yes? Rush doesn't mention that. He didn't even talk. He didn't talk to the guy that actually wrote the report either. Anyway, for sake of time, I won't divert. But okay. So our coal here, if you look at how our coal mix is, you have to take into effect some of it's coal, some of it's natural gas, some of it's nuclear, and the rest of it's all mostly hydro with some increasing numbers of renewables. So you take all those numbers together, and what you end up with, you do all the math on it, and that car doing the same 100 miles generates only 43.25 pounds of CO2. Now, the other issue dealing with the one report is that the power plants, virtually all of the power plants in China have no particulate traps. They just simply burn the stuff. There are no emission controls on most of those plants. Now, that's beginning to change. But virtually, the plants that they looked at 1,000 coal plants in this study in China. Virtually none of those plants have any kind of emission controls on them, as opposed to most of the plants in the United States, with maybe the exception of a few grandfathered, and even those probably have some type of emission controls on them, and those regulations are getting tighter and tighter. So when you take a look at this, you find out that not only is the CO2 emissions lower, but if we would try to compare the parts per million particulate releases, they're going to also be a lot less. So this story that electric cars are dirty is just, you know, biased and wrong. All right, so what about the fires? Boy, not only are electric cars dirty, but the darn things are dangerous because they burst in flames, right? You just never know you're going to have your life taken in your hands. You turn the ignition on and you might find yourself electrocuted, whatever. Okay, so I want you to notice carefully this photograph. You'll notice on the photograph the group conducting the crash test, the side barrier crash. This was the test that resulted in the first Volt fire back last May at the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration test facility. The story is, if you're not familiar with it, they did this side barrier crash test. They then took the car, stored it where they normally store their crash vehicles for further reference and testing and analysis, took it, stored it upside down, but the worst offense was they did not take and remove, oh God, I want to get a mental block here. They didn't discharge the battery pack. They conducted the crash test with a full battery pack, and then not only did they do that, they did not discharge the pack afterwards. So the car's sitting there for 3 weeks. And they didn't drain the gas tank. Well, they didn't use gas. Yeah, when they do the crash tests, my understanding, at least with these guys, they drain the gas out of them. They put a gasoline substitute in. So that part I don't, but I can't speak to the voltage, on the test part of this thing. So they stored the car upside down. They did not just battery pack. The severity of the crash of that particular Volt was enough to cause the fluid, the coolant fluid in the battery to begin to leak. And at the top of the battery, which is now, because it's upside down bottom, there is a circuit board. And so that fluid slowly began to drop and begin to crystallize, and there was enough energy left in that fully charged battery pack to cause that to short circuit, and of course then the car went up. You'll notice, however, this is not a National Highway Traffic Safety Administration crash test. This is the fire you never heard about. Why? Because no fire ever happened. Same test, no fire. Why? Because they discharged the battery pack and they didn't store it upside down. So if you're going to buy a Volt, make sure they cut you out of the Volt at least 3 weeks after the crash, right? And make sure they don't store you upside down.
Bill,
yes?
Didn't the National Highway Transportation Administration know before they did the test that they needed to turn that battery?
You would think. I don't know the answer to that. I don't know. I do know when I talked to the guys at the Highway Institute about this, because I saw this photo and I said, wait a minute, they did the same test. I haven't heard about any fires. This car, by the way, is in the lobby of their building in Alexandria, Virginia. So I hadn't heard about any fires. So when I asked them, I said, well, GM came to us later and said, if you've not discharged the battery, please discharge the battery, right? So I don't think anybody had probably thought about that at that point. I mean, this is new technology. This is the first crashed cars we've tested. Okay, so here's the ratings, and these ratings still stand. National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, their top 5-star safety rating, and even after the crashes, this still stands. Same thing with the Institute of Highway Safety. Top safety pick, still stands. I asked them, I said, are you guys going to revoke that rating? No way, it's the safest car we ever tested. Okay, so here's the story on the fires. There were a total of 5 fires. One was a garage fire in Connecticut, the first one last spring. Another was a fire this fall in North Carolina. Both were Volts that were in the fire, but subsequent fire marshal investigations proved that neither car was responsible for the fire. Now, what the cause was is still somewhat of speculation. I talked to the gentleman with the Connecticut fire, and he told me he thinks privately, he thinks that it was, he had a conversion he had done, and he thought that there might have been a problem with his DC to DC inverter or something that might have been the problem with the fire, but even he wasn't sure. The North Carolina, I have not heard what the official release is, other than they said, the fire marshal said that neither car was responsible. The other 3 crashes are the first crash where they turned the car upside down. The other 2 fires were when they brought cars who had been frontal crashed out of the storage area and side impact crashed them. They then took and turned those cars over, and in one case it took a couple days to have a fire, and the other one they had a brief smolder, nothing happened. So the cars are safe, but General Motors has taken an effort to take and beef up. There's a photo on my website, and you can find it on the internet, where they have developed a special additional bracket that fits up in that particular area and keeps the battery from that part of the vulnerable part of the battery being exposed. This is, and I'll let you read, we don't have time to go through it all here, but if you can quickly read it, basically we said we don't find a problem with the car. The car is safe. Not that I can say that for all electric cars. What is there about Teslas that they I've not found any Chevy Volt crashes, but boy, I sure found my share of it's that torque, man.